Thank you. You can be seated now. Or if you want to stand for another minute to unmoor your seats, that's fine too. Tonight is a very, very special evening. And I'm hoping that I don't get too emotional. I don't usually get that way. First of all, I want to recognize, I don't think we recognize them tonight, some of our allies in the pro-family movement, Tammy Kobza, the president of the Eagle Forum here in Iowa, and Kitty Rayberg, one of the best state senators ever in the state of Iowa. Phyllis Schlafly is indeed a conservative icon. No one, but no one, singly deserves more credit than this woman in birthing the modern conservative movement. She was there when no one was there on the right. She was fighting the battle when the Republican Party was dominated by the Nelson, Rockefeller, Gerald Ford wings of the party. I remember 1964 as a sophomore in high school reading the book, A Choice Not a Nickel, that inspired me to follow this great woman. And then I saw her fight the battle in being the single reason why we got pro-life language in the first Republican national platform. This woman is more knowledgeable on any given issue across the spectrum than probably anybody in this country, whether it's the life issue, choice in education, illegal immigration, and yes, her historic and ferocious fight in making sure that the infamous so-called Equal Rights Amendment never saw it into our U.S. Constitution or the Iowa State Constitution. She fought the battle not only once but twice against the ERA here in Iowa. And I'm going to tell this real short story. In 1992, when she came to Iowa, along with my mentor in the Pat Robertson campaign, Marlene Elwell, Phyllis came here, and I said to her, Phyllis, I love you. I respect you like no other person in our movement. But we are not going to defeat the ERA because the polls show that it's going to win with 85% of the vote. It was like 85 to 13. It was going to win. And I still remember to this day as if it were yesterday, 21 years ago, when she kind of gave me that blank stare, and I could see the expression on her face that platform committee. I saw her fight that battle every single day, making sure that our party stood strong on the life issue, and her fighting her person on the left, Ann Stone. Yet this is a woman with taking all the arrows that she does. I've never seen her lose her cool. She never shows her emotions. And when she knows she's right, she doesn't budge 1/2 inch. Every year we award our Friend of the Family Award, and I can't think of anybody more deserving, whether it's in Iowa or the country or the entire world, that deserves our support, our thanks, because if it wasn't for this woman, you and I wouldn't be here tonight. Phyllis Schlafly, we love you.
I share Steve's deep affection for Phyllis, and I will tell you that I first began to realize who Phyllis was as I was reading some of those documents I would send off for. And as I'd read down through this subversive material, I wouldn't look to see who wrote the article. I'd just see the headline, caught my attention. I'd read it. I'd get to the bottom and think, who had that clarity of thought? Who had that succinct utilization of language? I'd go back up to the top, Phyllis Schlafly, over and over and over again. It didn't take me very long to start paying attention to who Phyllis Schlafly is. But I want to give you a little piece that I didn't know until I looked back and I thought I better look up her bio. And now that I know that, it doesn't surprise me that much. During the Second World War, Phyllis Schlafly was a ballistics gunner and technician during the Second World War. Now, the technician part is Phyllis understands the underpinnings, the pillars of American exceptionalism as well as anybody I know. That's the technical part. Being on target, that's the ballistics gunner part, drilling it every time, inspiring Americans for generations and generations. And by the end of the war, Phyllis had received her undergraduate degree from Washington University in St. Louis, then went on to do her master's at Radcliffe. By 1946, she was a researcher for AEI, American Enterprise Institute, ran for Congress in 1952 in Illinois against insurmountable odds, and then became, as Steve said, a Republican delegate in 1960. And then I don't know actually was what he said, but that is true. And then in 64, wrote the book, A Choice, Not an Echo. And that helped bring clarity to the conservative thought, and it was behind the Goldwater movement, of which Phyllis was a delegate for. And then on into the 70s, when the women's movement decided that they were going to push the Equal Rights Amendment, and after 28 states had ratified, of 38, Phyllis Schlafly stood up and essentially alone defeated the ERA. And there's one little quote that we have to have a little flavor of this unique American iconic personality. If there's one little quote that I would add to this, it would be this on feminists. Phyllis Schlafly: men should stop treating feminists, not women, but feminists, like ladies, and instead treat them like the men they say they want to be. Okay. So, we are, ladies and gentlemen, living history, and I get to meet a lot of smart people in the world. There's a distinction, though, between smart people and smart, effective people. It's good instincts, it's good values, and it's a unique gift that Phyllis Schlafly has brought to this country decade after decade. And I'm pleased and proud to be standing here with Steve Scheffler, but I want him to be the man that actually hands this award over to our living, breathing icon, Phyllis Schlafly.
Phyllis,
thank
love
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Iowa friends, and thank you, Steve Scheffler and Steve King, two of the most effective activists for the conservative cause in the United States. Steve Scheffler, you've done a great job of bringing together all these people, growing numbers of people every year, teaching them how to be effective in politics. And Steve King, you certainly are my favorite congressman. We thank you for being down there, keeping the conservatives in the House in line so that they vote right and don't just go along with the establishment. And we have we've had so many good speakers tonight. I appreciate all the kind words that were said by the governor, by Mike Lee. We're looking forward to hearing from Sarah Palin. I appreciate our Eagle Forum Iowa State President, Tammy Kozma, being with us tonight, and the guy to whom we gave our annual Eagle Award from Eagle Forum in Iowa, Sam Clovis. And We all also thank Ralph Reed for all he's done for the conservative movement and for being here tonight. Thank you, Ralph. Now, I guess I'm known mostly for defeating the Equal Rights Amendment, but I don't need to tell you what's wrong with ERA, because the Equal Rights Amendment was on the ballot in Iowa twice, in 1980 and 1992, and you all defeated it. So you already know how bad it is. But what I would like to tell you is that I think the real lesson of our campaign against and defeat of ERA was that we showed that a little group of grassrooters can take on the whole establishment and beat them all. And that's what we did. As I go about the country, I find that many of our people are despondent. They're very sad about losing the election last year and the trail that Obama is taking our country down. And they almost don't know what to do. And it's kind of like it was after 1964, when we had that devastating defeat of Goldwater and victory of Lyndon Johnson. And then we had Nixon after that. And I can remember that conservatives were so despondent. It's the same way it is today. But I want to tell you how, when we took on the ERA fight, we were taking on the whole establishment. And I want to encourage you to know that you can do it again. At a little group in my kitchen, in our house on the bluffs of the Mississippi River, took them on and beat them all. Now let me tell you, when ERA came out of Congress in 1972, it passed the U.S. House 354 to 23. In the Senate, it passed 92 to 8. They had the big momentum. Within the first year, 30 states passed, and they only needed 38. They had a head start. It had a good name. Who could be against equal rights? Everybody who was anybody was for ERA, from Ted Kennedy to George Wallace. You couldn't name any important person who wasn't for ERA. It was in the Democratic National Platform. It was in the Republican National Platform. Everybody said it was impossible to stop it. Out of the entire U.S. Senate, there was only one senator who was willing to say a good word for us, Watergate Senator Sam Ervin. In the U.S. House, there were only 3 who dared to say a good word for us: Henry Hyde, George Hansen, and Bob Dornan. Nobody else would say anything. All the women's magazines were for it. 30 of them went together in a consortium to demand that ERA be immediately passed. All the women's organizations were for it. Oh, and Hollywood was for it. Alan Alda came repeatedly to our Illinois legislature to tell the legislators to hurry up and pass ERA. They had 99% of the media. Out of the whole country, there were only 2 newspapers who ever said a good word for us. They were the St. Louis Globe-Democrat, now defunct, and the Tampa Tribune. No other paper spoke up for us. There wasn't a single governor out of all 50 states who was for us. And 2 governors actually protested and marched against us, the governors of North Carolina and Florida. They had 3 presidents on their side. They had Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and Jimmy Carter. During Jimmy Carter's regime, they ran the ERA campaign out of the White House. You know, in the White House, they had something called the Situation Room or the War Room. That's where they were all supposed to go if Khrushchev dropped the bomb, and they'd go in that room to decide, what do we do now? Well, they ran the ERA campaign out of that room in the White House, and they invited wavering legislators to come for a visit to the White House. They had 3 first ladies on their side. They had Betty Ford, Rosalind Carter, and Lady Bird Johnson, and they were giving interviews all the time. And there was the conservative movement wasn't even for us. The chief vehicle of conservatism in those years was National Review. In 10 years, National Review never wrote one single article about the Equal Rights Amendment. There was no Rush Limbaugh talking about the feminazis. There was no Fox News saying we need fair and balanced news. There was no internet. The only thing we had was, of course, the telephone and the Phyllis Schlafly report. And our campaign started with the first one in February 1972 called What's Wrong with Equal Rights for Women? And over the 10 years of the fight, I probably wrote 100 different issues of the newsletter describing various bad effects of it. The media were not fair to us. Everything that was on was very much loaded against us. The only place we got a fair break was in the hearings before the state legislatures. And I traveled around and spoke at 41 of those state legislative hearings. And the state legislators, most of them were pretty decent persons, and they kind of thought you ought to hear from both sides if you were going to discuss this. So we laid out our plan, and I chose the battleground we fight on, which was the legal rights that women would lose if this amendment went into the Constitution. And for example, the classic discriminatory law was the draft law. And remember, we were still fighting the unpopular Vietnam War when it came out of Congress. And the draft law says male citizens of age 18 must register. Well, you change that to person, and that imperils the freedom of all 18-year-old girls. And when they went on television, they would make the women think they were all going to get a raise in pay, which of course was nonsense, because the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act was passed even before ERA. They had a time limit, and then they got a crooked extension when they couldn't get it within the 7 years. But toward the end of the game, they somehow got $15 million, and they ran television ads with Hollywood stars. And they used not only Alan Alda, but Archie Bunker, Mrs. Archie Bunker, Ed Asner, Dick Gregory, and a lot of other famous Hollywood stars. At that time, Bella Abzug was in the House of Representatives, and she persuaded the Congress to give her $5 million to have a big conference in Houston, which was designed to get the additional states to ratify because they needed 38. So they gave her $5 million for this, and they all had tax-paid trips to Houston, and it was had enormous media coverage about this conference. And after they passed their resolution demanding ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, then they passed their resolution demanding tax-funded abortions for any woman who wanted it. And after that, they passed their resolution calling for the whole gay rights agenda. So that conference didn't help them. For the first time, a lot of people saw what the feminist movement was all about. So they got no more states after that Bella Abzug conference in Houston. That really killed them when people saw on television what the feminist movement was all about. So the point I really want to make is not what's wrong with ERA, but that we proved that the grassroots could rise up and fight the whole entire establishment. Everybody was for ERA, all the way from Ted Kennedy to George Wallace, and the presidents and the presidents' wives and the governors, and everybody was for it. And we took them all on, and we beat them. And that should be an inspiration to you today, because I think what we are facing today is really another choice not an echo fight. That is the establishment in the Republican Party, the people we call rhinos, Republicans in name only, against the grassrooters. And they don't want any grassrooters to win. They'd rather have a Democrat win than an election to the Senate, because they only want people who will do what they're told. And somehow grassrooters like to believe they should represent their constituents and do what they think is right, rather than taking orders from the lobbyists in Washington. So my message to my message to you here is be of good heart. Don't be despondent about the sad state of conservatives and the Republican Party. The future of our country depends on what happens next year. We need at least 4 new senators who are conservatives to be elected next year, and it's your job to give us one of those. That's your main job. And I will be carrying that message elsewhere, because we have to realize that elections do have consequences, and we can't live with the consequences of last year. We've got to have the right result next year and make sure we do. But I just give you this illustration of what the grassroots can do against all the power and money in the country. You can do it, and we need you. We need Iowa to send us the right senators to Congress, and we need your support all up and down the line when you have your caucuses preceding the next presidential election. And we in Eagle Forum are ready to help. As we say in Eagle Forum, those who wait upon the Lord will rise up with wings like eagles, and they will run and not be weary. And don't you dare be weary, because we need every one of you through next year.